Some criminals are far too cunning for the regular justice system, and some topics are far too sensitive to be disclosed to the general public. Aliens. That's where the FBI comes in. With secrecy their top priority, the FBI has been investigating some truly strange cases over the last handful of years. While they have uncovered a small cluster of answers, for the most part, these mysteries remain unsolved.
I'm Al Capone. I run this city.
On a little island in the San Francisco Bay sits the most notorious prison on the entire planet, Alcatraz. This former penitentiary is home to one of America's greatest unsolved criminal mysteries, the ever-intriguing and unsolved escape of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. Alcatraz was the place that the troublemaking criminals were sent to when the regular system could no longer handle their attempted escapes. It was the prison of all prisons, where inmates were forced to face the wrath of remote-controlled tear gas dispensers, remote-controlled machine guns, metal detectors, and, of course, armed guards patrolling each floor around the clock. Not even Al Capone dared to try to escape. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers did, though. And they did so successfully. Over the course of 6 months, the men chipped away at the stone edges of their cell vent ducts. On June 11, 1962, they squeezed through the spoon-dug holes and slid down a vent pipe before climbing 2 barbed wire fences until they saw nothing but water. To this day, the FBI has been searching for these 3 men. Ultimately, having never found bodies or evidence of them alive, the FBI considered their survival impossible. For decades, they were presumed to be sitting at the bottom of the bay, but of course the FBI never stopped looking for clues. In January of 2013, the discourse took a turn. The FBI received some mail from a person claiming to be John Anglin. There have been photographs rumored to be of the escapees hiding out in Brazil, and family members have come forward. But at the end of the day, the proof is not conclusive, and this still remains one of the biggest unsolved cases in American history. Next up, the unsolved mystery of D.B. Cooper, the only air piracy event in commercial aviation history that has never been solved. This bewildering plane hijacking happened on Wednesday, November 24, 1971, and has continued to baffle investigators and true crime enthusiasts to this day. The culprit's name was Dan Cooper. Well, that's the alias he gave, at least. If you're wondering why we've been calling the man DB instead of Dan all these years, it's because a reporter jumped the gun, confusing one of the early suspects, a D.B. Cooper, with the alias that the real criminal had used, Dan Cooper. Anyway, on board the Northwest Orient Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle, the chaos started when the perp handed a flight attendant a handwritten note, warning of an explosive in his briefcase. Politely and calmly, he stated his demands: $200,000, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle. When the plane did touch down, Cooper received his demands, and then the 36 other passengers were safely released. But Cooper stayed on the plane and instructed the pilot to head towards Mexico. The plane didn't make it to Mexico, though, and when it landed for a refuel at Reno Airport in Nevada, the authorities realized that Cooper was gone. He'd parachuted out somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, unseen by any of the crew on board. To this day, his location remains a head-scratching mystery. See this diamond ring? Back in 1959, it was worth $275,000. In 2020, accounting for inflation, that's $2.4 million. It belonged to an American baroness named Vera Krupp until it was stolen on the evening of April 10, 1959 from her ranch about 26 miles southwest of Las Vegas. In a frightening ordeal, 3 men knocked on Vera Krupp's front door, offering to blacktop her long driveway. That was a scam, and within seconds they had forced their way in, snatched the ring off Krupp's finger, and tied Vera and her partner to a lamp. The robbers also took close to $700,000 in cash. For close to 6 months, it was a wild goose chase, and the high-value theft case remained unsolved. John William Hagginson, the man who was finally charged with the crime, had scampered all the way from Vegas to New Jersey with tens of notable stops, including Louisiana, Chicago, and Miami Beach. Moving along, all over the world, the idea of legitimate Sasquatch existence has delighted conspiracy theorists. As crazy as this might sound, though, since 1976, the FBI has been following Bigfoot as well. The case was opened when the FBI received a package in the mail containing about 15 hairs attached to a tiny piece of skin. The person who sent it, Peter Byrne of the Bigfoot Information Center and Exhibition, could not identify what kind of animal it came from and sought help. This was just the beginning. When Roger Patterson and Robert Gimlin released this famous video footage in 1967, which showed Bigfoot strolling around in Northern California, the investigation became a little more serious. As of 2019, the FBI released its Bigfoot file. It discussed the analysis of those 15 hairs and reignited the discussion of what might be out there. According to their analysis, the hairs came from an animal of the deer family. However, not everybody believes that this is the truth. If you believe in Bigfoot, then there's a good chance that you're open to the idea of otherworldly beings as well. Apparently, so is the FBI, because from the 1940s through the 60s, their agents started investigating a group of people called the Contactees. This collection of Americans all shared one unique characteristic. They claimed that they had been contacted by aliens. Among the long list of contactees, there were a couple of names that stood out, a couple of people that the FBI showed a little extra interest in. First, we had Orfeo Angelucci. He believed that his mental energy had been transported up to space, and that his Earth presence was simply an avatar. Another notable person of interest was George Adamski. He had taken photos of UFOs, photos which were confiscated and investigated. It might sound a little wacky, but there might be more than meets the eye in this case. A Freedom of Information request was sent to the FBI, asking them to release Angelucci's case file records. For all we know, the contactee's study was inconclusive, and the strange mystery remained unsolved. Around the same time that aliens were being investigated by top government authorities, one of the biggest heists in American history was underway. The Brinks Robbery. In Boston, Massachusetts, on the evening of January 17, 1950, a group of armed, masked men emerged from the Brinks building, holding $2.775 million worth of checks, money orders, cash, and other securities. That's equivalent to close to $30 million in today's value. In the immediate aftermath, the FBI was at a loss. All they could determine based on the interviews with the 5 employees was the following. 1. Between 5 and 7 robbers had entered the building. 2. They wore peacoats, gloves, and chauffeurs' caps. 3. They couldn't see their faces because they were hidden behind Halloween masks. As the FBI approached hundreds of dead ends, the case captured the imagination of millions of Americans and became the talk of the town. After finally getting a meaningful lead, the color and type of a nearby parked car, the FBI made ground. But for 6 years, it remained unsolved. The gang of thieves was led by Joseph Big Joe McGinnis. They were tried and convicted in 1956. It wouldn't be an FBI video if we didn't throw in a bit of spy talk, now would it? Once the Cold War had come to an end, the FBI revealed that a man named Harry Rositsky was a secret spy. He'd been hiding out, providing information on WW2 Germany, as well as the Soviets thereafter. He wasn't just any regular spy, though. He was an American spy master, meaning that he oversaw an entire network of spies scattered across the vast areas. For a long time, he was referred to as the Falcon. Why? Codenames. The group he was in charge of had been dubbed the Aviary, with each spy given a different bird name. It's believed that it was the Falcon who unearthed the truth about the Majestic 12, an organization allegedly consisting of a committee of scientists, military leaders, and government officials that was formed back in 1947 by former President Harry Truman. Its purpose? To facilitate the recovery of and investigate alien spacecraft. What's really perplexing about the Aviary, however, is that the FBI claims that there were a number of other documents outlining information about the Falcon and his dug-up secrets, but somehow they'd either been lost or destroyed. Think of that what you will. Our next case involves perhaps the most famous act of assassination not only in the United States, but in the world. The victim, the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. His limousine, with the top down, was the target of a radical attacker who was perched up on a 6th-floor window. Just 2 days later, the assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, had been taken care of himself by police informant Jack Ruby at point-blank range. The strangest and most damning fact was that it took place on live TV. Meanwhile, the FBI was in overdrive. With Oswald gone, they had no direct source to information. Did Oswald act alone, or was he involved with something larger? They were conducting thousands upon thousands of interviews, tallying some 25,000 interviews in total. After a painstaking and heartbreaking investigation, they closed the case, declaring that Oswald acted alone. Although without a confession, we will never truly know for sure. Albertnussbaum and Bobby Wilcoxon had robbed 8 banks, built a giant arsenal of weapons, taken the life of a bank security guard, and set off explosives throughout Washington, D.C. By December of 1961, once 5 banks had been robbed, they were on the FBI's top 10 fugitive list. The authorities knew who carried out the crimes, but they had no idea where they were hiding. According to the FBI's website, every single one of their field offices was tracking these criminals, and they were in contact with a number of international organizations for assistance as well. In the end, it was the criminals' own stupidity that proved their undoing. Nussbaum decided to contact his estranged wife out of desperation. She told her mother called the FBI, and that was the first link in the chain reaction to finally remove the Unsolved label from this epic, frightening crime spree. Up next, all it took was 81 minutes for 2 Boston men to steal $500 million worth of art from the Isabella Gardner Museum back in 1990, and to this day, it remains one of the most devastating thefts of private art to have ever been carried out. Among the 13 near-priceless pieces stolen was Rembrandt's only copy of The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, valued in excess of $100 million just on its own. We know from security footage that it played out around midnight on the 18th of March, when a Dodge Daytona pulled up to the museum's side entrance. It wasn't brute force that got them in, it was foolery. They disguised themselves as fake police officers and simply pushed the museum buzzer, suggesting that they were responding to a disturbance call. Once they were in, they tied up the night watchman and had free reign over the museum. The FBI hastily assembled a suspect list, but it was far too broad and led them to nothing but dead ends. It took until 2018, some 30 years later, when the FBI announced that they had supposedly found their men. Still, however, the artwork remains lost. All these years later, the museum is still offering a multi-million-dollar reward for information that leads directly to the recovery of the artwork in good condition.